Anyway, my name is Dan Johnson. I'm the founder and national director of People Against the NDAA. This is Politics What They Don't Want You to Know. How to force your public officials to do things they don't want to do. So, start off a little bit. My long downward spiral into the world of politics was never something I wanted to get involved in. Poly is many and ticks are blood-sucking creatures. And there has not been a change after about 2.5 years of activism. So I came across a YouTube video back with my first semester in college when I was a freshman. I came across a YouTube video called 61 Senators Betrayed You Today. And I remember thinking, 61 senators betrayed me today? That's not right. Obama's the only thing wrong with this country. And so I watched the video, and it was about 5 minutes long. It was about the NDAA. It's about the fact that the military can indefinitely detain you without charge or without trial. And I remember sitting in front of my computer screen going, wow, I can't believe this is happening in America. In the land of the free and home of the brave. I was brought up to believe America's the land of the free and home of the brave. You trust the authorities. You trust your government. I was brought up on very neoconservative, you could say. And in seeing that video, I realized that when I'd studied the rise and fall of the Third Reich and the rise and fall of Imperial Japan, that was happening here. And so we started a little organization at the time known as PANDA, People Against the NDAA. We went to our local city council, and we got together with some college students. We had Young Americans for Liberty there, Occupy Wall Street there, and Young Republicans of Bowling Green there. And we asked our mayor a simple question. Will you, of course the military would never come detain any person in this city. Will you put your name on a piece of paper saying that would never happen? And we filled the room. I figured that would be enough. We filled the entire city council room. We filled the atrium. We had newspapers there. We had local TV there. And they didn't even have the guts to call me. They didn't have the guts to walk up to me and tell me to my face. They copied me on an email from the mayor to the head of city council saying these students should have taken Government 160. They don't know the inner workings of our national government, and it's up to us to educate them. So basically told us, go back to basic government class, come out when you're ready to vote. And from that point, we fought very valiantly but unsuccessfully for about 1.5 years. We went to the state level. We launched Operation Homeland Liberty. This was to ban the NDAA in 365 days, 50 pieces of legislation at the state level. We were 1 year old when we launched this. We ended up introducing or pushing 18 pieces of legislation that year and lost every single time. That is where, Einstein talks about if you do the same thing over and over again, you expect different results, you're absolutely insane. And we were insane. And we went into politics with the idea that you needed to be polite to your representatives, that you needed to be nice to these people, that you needed to convince them about the issue, that you needed to talk to them, and you needed to sit down with them, you needed to make an appointment with them. And what we found out when we started winning is we completely changed our strategy. We basically got jaded. We got sick and tired of dealing with these people, and we decided we really don't care what they think anymore. And this is what they don't want you to know, and this is our story. So we essentially decentralized, number one, and we completely shifted our paradigm when dealing with politicians and when dealing with public officials. Paradigm shift, part one. Would the masters of the system give you the key to beat it? If you own a box, and you know there are a lot of people who want to get in that box, would you, when teaching them how to paint the box, tell them how to get in? Of course not. Yet all of our school textbooks on how to get involved in politics and get involved in activism are written by politicians, or former politicians, or their advisors. Do you think they would give you the keys to the system? Of course they would never give you the keys to the system. And that's why they tell you to be polite to them. Contacting your representative, this should be no surprise to some of the people in the audience. Contacting your representative doesn't work, by the way. Sending a letter to your congressman, you know what he does with that letter? Oh. That's how that works. So the most laughable word, I think, in the English language is representative. The idea that one person could accurately represent everything you think, feel, and believe in the political spectrum and then do the exact same thing for all other 10,000 of their constituents is a laughable idea. Now, when people tell me we need to be polite as public officials, I ask them, we have this cliche in America that our public officials are supposed to work for us. Well, if they're supposed to work for us, then why don't we tell them what to do? See, what we do is we call them up, we go, Mr. or Mrs. Representative, yes, this is X person. I'd like to meet with you at your convenience, perhaps 2 months from now in your office for a half hour if you have that amount of time. What should happen is you should call them and go, hey, I'm getting off work at 5, call me. Okay? That's what should be happening because they technically work for you. I liken politicians to a bunch of employees sitting in the stocking room of a grocery store. They're supposed to stock the tomato juice or the tomato soup, and they're looking at you and you're telling them, well, go stock it. And they look at you and go, not my job. Are you then just going to be polite to them and say, well, would you really please stock the shelves? I really want you to stock the shelves. But that's what we do. We use this decorum. We use this politeness. If they are our employees, we should probably start telling them what to do. Thomas Jefferson said, when the government fears the people, there's tyranny. When the people fear the government, there's liberty. He did not say, when the government sits down with you over coffee and a drink and talks about your issue, there is liberty. He said, when the government fears you, there's liberty. Now, this doesn't mean violence. In fact, violence is stupid. Number one, why do we have martyrs? People who give up their lives in Tunisia during the Arab Spring. A man burned himself alive. Obviously, his reputation was more important than his life. Why do billionaires finance expeditions to the Arctic to name mountains after them that no one will ever climb? Reputation, your name, the mark you leave on the world around you and the mark you leave on the world is more important to you than your life. So why would we go after them violently? Not only is it immoral to go after someone who has not harmed you violently, but it's stupid because their reputation is more important to them than their life. So how do you do this? You start by winning without government. There's a saying, and I think it's quite true, that if you write down a goal instead of actually thinking about it, if you write down a goal, you are 50 times more likely to achieve it. And I think it's true. So you start with a mission. You start with a goal. One of the big problems with Occupy Wall Street, many of you guys know, is they didn't really have a mission. They didn't really have a goal. They just kind of went there and protested and stood in the street for a while. They didn't really have a mission or a goal. So before you start organizing without the government, without their help, without going to your politicians, before you start organizing like that, create a goal. Now, this goes to any issue, whether it's the NDAA or whether it's another issue you're fighting or another issue you're fighting for. Many people go out and start talking to their friends, start talking to their family, start talking to their neighbors about how bad this issue is and how much they need to do something about it. Well, let me let you imagine this scenario. I'm your city council person. You're sitting down at my desk, and we're talking a little bit. You're talking about, let's say, a resolution you want to pass. And you hand me the resolution, but attached to that resolution, you have a Post-it note. And that Post-it note has 20 individual names on it. How many people do I think support your resolution? 20. Good guess. 20. Now imagine if instead that Post-it note has the name of 10 groups on it. How many people do I think support your resolution? I have absolutely no effing clue, and it scares the crap out of me. That unknown, that mystery, that not knowing scares the daylights out of me. So what I recommend first is that you begin building a coalition with people of like mind. You do not begin by contacting your representative. You begin by working outside the government. Because when you try to change a law, at least most of you in here understand this, when you try to change a law, you're trying to do a lot more than change the law. You're trying to change the actions. You're trying to change how they utilize certain things or how they act certain ways. So if you're trying to change the actions and not just the law, and you just decide, well, I'm going to contact my representative and all 2 of us are going to go say hi to them, Even if they do pass your law, what have you done to change the culture of your community to back up that piece of legislation? I don't think you've done anything. And so it is necessary to begin organizing outside the government, start coalition building, and continue coalition building. This, in my opinion, is one of the biggest issues I'll use the term liberty movement faces, is we've forgotten that we have a market. Every salesman has a market, a specific group of people they go to. If you're a copier salesman, you don't go to an apartment building and try to sell copiers. Why would you go to an apartment building and try to sell copiers? You might sell one every 4 or 5 days or 4 or 5 weeks, but it's definitely not going to be the best use of your time. And who has all day in the world? Anybody have all day in the world in here? No, we have a limited amount of time. Most of us have day jobs. Limited amount of time to actually preserve liberty and make sure there's a future in this country. So we need to pick our market. Now, anybody want to guess what percentage of people in the colonial period actually participated in the American Revolution? Not even a guess. 3%. There we go. That's why we have groups called the 3%ers. Most people do not understand the American Revolution was not a popular revolution. It was not Egypt. It was not millions of people in the streets. It was 3%, not even just in the violence. It was 3% of the nation that actually even participated in so much as handing out flyers. Now, how many have heard of the Sons of Liberty? Sons of Liberty? Who knows who the true Sons of Liberty were? Okay. The Sons of Liberty were created by people we know, Patrick Henry, John Adams, etc. So the Sons of Liberty put together, and then the Sons of Liberty name started being used to essentially extort people. You had a South Carolina group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty that would go house to house to house to house and ask for a certain amount of money in order not to rob you. So essentially, the Sons of Liberty, even as small a group as they were, the main people such as Patrick Henry cut off and created an even smaller group called the True Sons of Liberty, and those are the people who actually made sure that we broke away from the British. Less than 3% actually participated in the American Revolution. So when I hear things like, we have to wake everyone up, we have to get everyone out of their seats, we have to get everyone to do something, I say, you're going through the wrong approach. Because just like any idea, you have to sell it. And there's only a certain amount of people who will buy what you are selling. If what you are selling is action and not just the idea of liberty, there are only a certain amount of people who will actually buy what you are selling. It is important to pick your market of people who actually care. So let's try something. For those of you who were at my NDAA presentation, you guys might remember this slide. This is a Communities Against Terrorism initiative. There are about 30 different types of these documents given out to business owners all across the country. Here's who you're supposed to look at. Here's who the next terrorists are. People or groups who demand identity privacy. So you don't want to give your social security number to Best Buy? Obviously a terrorist. People who insist on paying with cash. People who have have missing hand or fingers, strange odors, and ketchup stains on their clothes. This is who you're supposed to call the FBI over, by the way. People who make racist or extreme religious statements, coupled with comments that are violent or appear to condone violence. People who make suspicious comments regarding anti-US. This is fun. What are some anti-US comments? Anybody? Go Canada. All right. I'm half Canadian, so okay. Anyway, what else? What? President sucks. Anything else? And the Fed. We can go through a whole list of anti-US comments. It really depends on who you're talking to. Radical theology. Vague or cryptic warnings that suggest or appear to endorse the use of violence in support of a cause. What's the problem with a vague warning? It's vague. You're not supposed to get it. Now, we've gone through that exercise and going in a direction that you may not have expected. So, who were you thinking about when I read those things off? Admit it, you were thinking about yourself. Do I fit into that category? It's exactly what you were thinking, right? Who was thinking that? Do I fit in those categories? Okay, that was an exercise. And it's designed to teach a point. One of the reasons that groups like the NRA, agree or disagree with them, one of the reasons groups like that are so powerful is because the people involved are self-interested in all of the actions that go on. Most of them own guns or have friends that own guns, or really believe guns are necessary in our society. So, the key there is self-interest. And your potential partners in your coalition are asking the same thing. Everybody who thinks about joining you in a coalition to take on your local government or to take on your state government, everyone who thinks about joining you in your coalition is thinking, how does this affect me? That's all they're thinking. So if you go up to them and say how great this would be for liberty and how great this would be for the future of this country, they don't care. They're thinking, how does this affect me? So when you're coalition building, this is tip number 2. Tip number 1, start a coalition. When you're coalition building, tip number 2, is when you reach out to your coalition partners, tell them how this affects them. Why should they care? Not why you care, but why should they care? That is what's key to building a coalition. Make it matter to them. Here's a case study. Republican Party of Nevada. 2 years ago, the Republican Party of Nevada had no interest in anti-NDAA action. In fact, Congressman Heck supported the NDAA wholeheartedly. He actually helped write it. He was on the House Armed Services Committee from Nevada. And what we approached them with over time was not only pressure at the local level and at the state level to make it matter to them, but we said, look, other Republican parties are doing it. Why don't you join the bandwagon? You might get left behind, and if you're left behind, your voters may not like you anymore. So why don't you join the bandwagon? This could affect every Republican because of their political views. So we'll pull out points where somebody said a Republican is a terrorist, and we'll give that to them and say, here's why you are affected directly by this. If you don't, people might actually join the Democrat Party because they might see their anti-NDAA resolution as better. Again, applying it directly to them. What happened? This year, the Republican Party of Nevada unanimously passed a resolution condemning the NDAA and urging any representative and any person in the Republican Party to take action against it. Part 2, paradigm shift. This paradigm shift occurred with one question that was given to me. I was in San Diego, California. Who all knows who Ernest Hancock is? Well, he's about to get some free advertising. Ernest Hancock I met in San Diego, California at Libertopia. And him and I were talking a little bit, and I was telling him about PANDA. This is at the point where we were taking on the state legislatures, before we changed anything. I was telling him about PANDA, telling him about what we were doing. And telling about how we tried so hard, but the closest we got was 32-33 House vote in Colorado. It was the closest we got to signing something good into law. And he looks at me, and he waits patiently, and he just looks at me, and he goes, so let me get this straight. You're building a big collective to take on their collective, and collectively you're going to defeat collectivism? And at which point you kind of, ow, that hurt. You kind of think about that for a second. But you know, he was right. Most organizations are set up this way, which is why you are rightly skeptical about joining any particular organization. Most organizations are set up this way. I know we were set up, you had chapters, then you had state teams, then you had national director, and as much as we would say we're run by the grassroots because when they told us to do something we did, the fact of the matter is, when you have, try running 72 chapters by yourself. You create bureaucracy because you need it. So you add bureaucracy, so it gets harder. Then when people had to ask approval for our logo because we didn't want our name being dragged through the mud. Now it would take 2 weeks for a request to get through to national, and we were acting like a government. And yet this is how just about every single organization in the nation is set up. It is set up as a centralized model, a collective action. Now, collective action, instead of individual action, is the antithesis of liberty. You cannot create a government to fight a government. And it goes from they help us to we help you and I help myself. We were originally you help us. Come help us. Now we help you. We're activist trainers. We help you, and you help yourself. That paradigm shift, part 2. So what are some problems with the centralized model? Just show of hands. Who runs an organization here or is at the high level of a organization? Anybody? A couple. Okay. So the problems with the centralized model, standard model of organization. I talked about one, bureaucracy. It takes 2 weeks to get anything done. How are you going to react? How are you going to actually make real change when someone wants your help, it has to go through 4 people, half of them are on vacation, 2 of them have their kids to feed that day, and it doesn't ever get to you? Number 2, turnover. When people are not being responded to, people are not being helped, they leave. When through the first year and a half of our existence, we had a 50% turnover rate, which means 50% of the people who would come into the organization every year would leave, would no longer be involved with us. The turnover rate was that great. Time restrictions. If you're leadership in this type of organization, you only have so much time. And so you're spending half of it dealing with committees and dealing with bureaucracy. You don't have enough to actually spend working with and training and helping the grassroots actually win. 4, herding cats. This is something many of you people should know. Herding cats. When you're in a centralized organization, you have to get everybody on board and reach out. Come on, everybody, let's go. And it takes 2 weeks to get anything even started because you have to herd all the cats together. Money and power. As the organization gets bigger, it takes more money to run, which means you take in more money. And what is money? Money is but the indicator of how much power or how much influence you have. The more money you have, the more influence you have, and the more power you have. And what does that lead to? The most dangerous thing to the liberty movement, which is co-optation. Who's heard of Fight for the Future or the Internet Freedom Movement or the Cat Signal or net neutrality? Anybody? Okay. I did an expose on that movement. If you want it, you can come up later. I'll give you my business card, send it to you. We did an Excel spreadsheet on that movement to show how they were being funded by the Ford Foundation, the Koch brothers, the Open Society Foundation under George Soros, and the MacArthur Foundation. Co-optation is one of the most dangerous things to the liberty movement because they take something good and they get you starstruck. And you're hanging around all your heroes. You're hanging around all the people who love you. And then they bring you in, and all of a sudden, you're either ineffective or you're working for the enemy. I watched this happen with an organization called Restore the Fourth that has now kind of come out of that. But they were rendered completely ineffective because they started listening to, as I quote, DC experts who were telling them what to do. Because they walk in, they slap their credentials on the table, and all of a sudden, you're being used by the powers that be. All of these, including, finally, it goes against the human motivating factors. A centralized organization takes away self-direction from the grassroots. And in doing so, you're taking away one of 3 key motivating factors that people are moved on. Now, when basic needs are taken care of, meaning you don't have to go out and go on the street and with a bucket and get money. When basic needs are taken care of, here's what social psychologists found that motivates people. They figured it would be money. So they started giving people more and more and more money. They did this study in India and they did this in the United States. And what they found was above a certain money threshold, meaning you were comfortable, above a certain money threshold, handing people money and more money to do the same task didn't make them any more efficient at the task, didn't make them any better at the task, and in fact, unless it was a task like menial work, like stamping steel or something like that, unless it was a task like in a factory, if it required any brain power at all, paying them more than that was reasonable to pay them actually decreased their productivity. So they thought, well, if all humans aren't mindless zombies motivated by money, then what are they motivated by? Here's the 3 factors: mastery, purpose, and self-direction. Number 1, to be able to get better at something, to be able to master something. Humans are motivated by the ability to get continually better at whatever they do. Number 2, purpose, that what they do goes to a larger purpose. When I talk about what I do, I talk about creating a future for the country. It goes to a larger purpose than just ourselves. It is the second motivating factor of humans. And third is self-direction. The ability to make your own decisions as to where you want to go and to not have someone bearing down on you, forcing you to do something against your will, even in an organization. Case study, Wikipedia. Wikipedia, thousands of programmers came together and donated their time, their energy, and their resources to an organization that would pay them absolutely nothing. But it had a purpose, being the freeing of information and making sure that people have all the information they need in a crowdsourced application. Number 2, mastery. You get better and better at programming Wikipedia, and you can program different pages, and you can create better tools. And then finally, self-direction. They handed the tools, and they said, go. And yet Wikipedia is now one of the top sites on the internet. And that is because they understood human motivating factors. Oop, I am having, okay, come on. Back. Forward. So centralized organizations kill self-direction, and in doing so, they kill the motivation of people to actually act. And so when you are telling people what to do, instead of offering yourself up as an advisor, as someone who gives suggestions, as someone they can go to and someone they can be accountable to, when you are telling people what to do in any, however small, from 5 people to 10,000, when you are telling people what to do in a centralized model, you are killing the final and most important part of human motivation, which is self-direction. And that's why the centralized model does not work. So, come on. Okay, great example, pots of stew. The centralized with the decentralized model. This kind of recaps it all. If you have the centralized model, you have a big pot of stew. And in this big pot of stew, everybody needs to pitch in. And everybody needs to make sure they put whatever ingredient in the stew they're supposed to put in. And you have duplicates. 10 people are bringing salt. 20 people are bringing potatoes. 30 people are bringing carrots. Well, what is this a model of? This is socialism. This is everybody puts in their share, and then everybody gets some out of it. Well, what happens is some people go, well, somebody else will fill the pot. I know somebody else will fill the pot. I don't have to fill the pot. And you get less stew for everyone. They create liberty lines instead of bread lines. Instead of lining up for bread, you have people lining up for liberty because in an organization of 150 people, 5 do the work. Several of you know what I'm talking about. In an organization of 150 people, 5 do the work because everybody looks at the pot of stew and goes, well, somebody else will fill it. Accountability is still necessary. This is important. What we do is we check in with our people taking back their towns. We have about 100 people we advise. We check in with them every couple weeks. How you doing? Can we give you some help? Can we help you along? That accountability is still important and it's still necessary to help them move along. However, that's the most control we ever exert over our people because the centralized model kills self-direction. And when you kill self-direction, that's why 50% of people were leaving our organization every single year. Let's go to a case study on how this decentralized model works. Albany, New York, not too far from here, the capital of New York. In the capital of New York, this is the first test of the decentralized model and of the model of self-direction, of the model of no longer caring what politicians think. And we were told there's no way you could ever win Albany. It's a one-party city. There are 15 Democrats on the council. Every single elected position in the city of Albany is held by a Democrat. Do I care whether it's held by a Democrat or Republican? No. But just as in a two-party system, a one-party system has even more power. We were told there's no way you could possibly win. So what did we do? We started reaching out to groups in the area. We started by coalition building. We found about 15 groups, from peace groups such as Veterans for Peace and the ACLU to the other side of the spectrum such as the Troy Tea Party. We got all of these groups together and then said, here's the goal. The goal is a city council meeting on October 9th, 2013. That's the goal. Get people there. Get people to contact their representatives. Get people to contact them through email or through phone. Projected vote was 9-6 against. We created a coalition of 20 organizations on the outside who sent letters into the Albany City Council saying, we're watching you. Make sure you do what's right. Massive media campaign. When we launched TakeBackAlbany.com, the final numbers were over 3,000 people sending emails and phone calls to the Albany City Council on an issue nobody in the city had ever heard of before. Over 500 flyers were distributed, and on the day of the event, we had a live band and 100 people at City Council. And the live band was a nice touch. The atrium was full, the council chambers were full, and I texted our guy at the city council. I said, hey, when you go up, make sure to say, everybody in favor of this resolution, stand up. When he did that, the co-chair of city council, his jaw dropped. The entire room stood up. His jaw dropped. He was our biggest opponent. And after the vote, the chair of city council talked to our representative and said, that is the most we've ever seen on any issue ever in the city of Albany, New York. What was the final vote? 11-0. They were scared to vote against us. Even our detractors who decided to vote abstention were scared to vote against us because they knew it would be the end of their political career. And remember, this is a city that no one knew about the NDAA, and in 3 months, the city council was forced to vote 11-0 on our resolution. Another case study, Emmett, Idaho. For those of you who say, well, I don't know anyone. I don't really know anyone in the political arena. I don't know anyone who cares about politics. Jason moves to Emmett, Idaho, little town, 3,500 people in the state of Idaho. He doesn't know anyone. He goes to a city council meeting, and he meets a director of a local Tea Party. Together, they start organizing the people of Emmett against the NDAA. They get several organizations on board from the left and the right. They come into the city council chambers. They bring 80 people, pack the entire council. And the council was going to vote on it next year. They said, we're going to push the resolution until next year. Well, Jason we don't trust politicians. We don't work with them anymore. Jason calls up and goes, you're going to have it at this meeting or you will lose your job. So they had it at the meeting, the last meeting of the year, December 17th, 2013. 80 people show up. Now, for any of you who've done any political work at all, 80 people in a town of 3,500 is basically the entire electorate of the town. So these 80 people show up to Emmett City Council. The vote ends up being 4-1, and they pass the resolution. In Gem County, Idaho, then they go up. 60 people show up to Gem County. It's a county of about 12,000 people, not a very big county at all. 60 people show up to Gem County. One of the county commissioners looks at the crowd and makes the dumbest mistake he made in his political career. He says, I only want 10 people in this room. The rest of you, out. Now, he was supposed to win re-election. He was slated to go be county commissioner essentially forever. He was supposed to win re-election. What he won was he resigned. Okay? The state senator in that district who introduced our legislation against his will, he didn't want to introduce it, he introduced it against his will, but because he didn't study it, didn't care, and looked like a bumbling idiot going up there and saying, well, I'm introducing the RCGR. Well, what's it about? Well, darn. Jason, please help. When he did that on video, and please bring video cameras. That's one point I forgot to put in the presentation. First time I've ever given this. One point I forgot to put in the presentation. Bring video cameras. Record absolutely everything. Bring multiple cameras. Anyway, so brings video camera into the state legislature, reports this guy looking like a bumbling idiot, and then because the guy knew, the state senator, who was also supposed to win re-election, he was supposedly a good guy. He was fighting Common Core. He was on the Liberty Republican side of things. Because he knew that we wouldn't take his bumbling answer as he really cared about the issue, he resigned. So things continued to fall into place from there. We went to Middleton, Idaho, just a little bit outside of Emmett. And Middleton just outside of Gem County. We show up there. We've been texting them. Texting one of the city councilmen and the mayor. Here's what we've been doing recently. Here's what's happened. We go in there. We give a 7-minute presentation on the NDAA. Present them the resolution. They go, all in favor? Aye. Boom. Now, he shows up in Buell, Idaho, 2.5 hours away. He shows up in Buell, and there's a city councilman sitting there, and he's reading off papers. And he's like, some arsehole in Emmett, Idaho keeps telling these city councilmen what to do, and we really hate him, and he's an awful person. We hope he doesn't ever come here. Jason walks in, they're talking about him at a city council meeting 2.5 hours away from where he lives. They're talking about him, and they're talking about the people of Emmett. He shows up there, and when he gets up and says who his name was, the city councilman is sitting in his chair and goes, the other city councilor comes up to Jason and asks him, are you guys going to recall me if I don't vote for this? Are you guys, we had the governor candidate for Idaho, the attorney general candidate for Idaho, the candidate for mayor in Emmett, the candidate for the mayor of Emmett is running for the seat of the county commissioner who resigned and asked us to endorse them. The governor asked us to endorse them. The attorney general asked for endorsement. We said no, we don't endorse politicians. But how many people got called by your city councilman recently, oh, please, I'd like to run against the guy who betrayed you? Okay. Case study, Emmett, Idaho. The people now own that county. Why do I say that? Because 2 months after the anti-NDAA resolution passed in Emmett, Jason's sitting in a city council meeting and he sees something come up. It's called smart growth. Smart growth. Well, that sounds a little bit like Agenda 21, doesn't it? Who's familiar with Agenda 21 in here? Anybody? Okay. So he sees this on the agenda and he goes up and speaks at the city council meeting. And he says, well, they were going to vote on it that day. I was like, I don't think we should vote on it right now. Let me bring in somebody and let me talk about this. They go, oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll go 2 weeks from now. So 2 weeks from now, they have this smart growth on the agenda. They appoint him as an advisor on this issue. He brings in somebody from the outside. They're talking about Agenda 21. Well, it turns out the city had accepted $117,000 from Smart Growth America, along with an advisor to figure out how to implement Agenda 21 in Emmett. They forced the city council to return the money, send back the letter, when 50 people showed up at that city council meeting. And this wasn't us. This wasn't Panda. This was, we empowered people to take back their city, and they took it back. About a month ago, anti-Second Amendment ordinance was introduced, allowing only councilmen to carry in the chambers. Now, I don't know what idiot tried for that, but only councilmen could carry in the council chambers. That does not have a chance because the people of Emmett, Idaho now own their county, and whatever the city council does, they call up Jason or they call up somebody in the area before they make the decision, because they know if they make the wrong decision, they go against the people, they are done. That was fun. All right, so to recap, the paradigm shifts and we'll do some Q&A as well. The paradigm shifts that I ask you to understand are this. Number one, self-direction is important, and it is crucial. If you have or you are in a centralized organization, if you want to win, they need to decentralize. They need to completely get rid of bureaucracy, chapters, teams, and reform them at themselves as an advisor, empowering people to take back their own towns, to take back their own cities. Number two, creating a coalition and going against the government is the way to do it. I had a lady in Michigan. I was speaking in Michigan, and I had a lady at the local Campaign for Liberty. I asked, there was about 15 people there, and I said, so what's the first thing you do when you want to take back your county? And she raised her hand. She said, you contact your county commissioner. I said, absolutely not. They are like the DMV. Like, you have to go get your paperwork, but you don't go there till you have to. And that's the same thing with politicians. Never try to convince, unless you want practice. If you want practice, go have fun. Please, have fun. Practice is wonderful. If you want to get results, never try to convince a politician on your issue, ever. When you try to convince them on your issue, you are speaking Chinese. In Albany, New York, you ask any of the city councilors who voted for that resolution what the NDAA is, they'll look at you cross-eyed. What? Because they didn't need to know. They listen to one thing and one thing only. You want to play on their game board, try to convince them about the issue. You want to play on your game board? Then what you do is you approach them in a language they understand. That language is pressure. And that's the only language they understand, is how many people are coming to me. That's why the Post-it note is so important. How many groups are backing you? How many people are coming to me? And anybody want to guess how much of the population you need to pressure a politician enough, on average, to do what you want to do? Very close. Yes, you're good. You need 1 to 3% of the registered voters. As a guess as number, take your population of their county, slice it in half, those are registered voters, take 1 to 3% of that. That's all you need represented to own every political decision that goes on in your city or in your county. But if you want results, never try to convince a politician on your issue. Show up in force, show up in more force next time, show up in more force next time, because what's going through the head is they're sitting here and they're going, all right, so there's 10 people in the audience this week. I've never heard about this issue before in my life. There's 10 people in the audience. Okay, I guess maybe I should be concerned. 2 weeks later, wow, there's 30 people in the audience. That issue just tripled in awareness in 2 weeks. Wow, this is going to be important. Next week, there's 60 people in the audience. I might be losing my job if I don't get behind these people sometime soon. Usually it takes about 3 to 4 weeks, or three to four meetings to get that done. So number 1, decentralize. Number 2, do not play their game board. Do not try to convince a politician on anything. Show up in force, hit them hard with the coalition that you build. Number 3, first step, and my recommendation should always be building a coalition. Do not go to the government first. Build your coalition, build a group of people around you. That should be your first step. Only show up to government when you have to. And remember that when you try to tell people what to do, instead of allowing them to be self-directed and just being there as an advisor, you take away one of the key motivating factors of every human being. You will have turnover and you will have people walk away. Some people will stay with you, but it'll be nowhere near as effective as you could be if you had just given people advice, been there for suggestions, been there for help, instead of trying to direct exactly what they do and acting like a government as a centralized organization. Finally, for those of you who weren't here a little bit toward the beginning, Thomas Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. It does not say when the government sits down with you and your issue over coffee every once in a while, there is liberty. And for those NSA, FBI, DHS agents who are listening, first of all, you can be part of the resistance too from the inside. Second of all, you have listened to me talk about this. I do not mean violence, because violence is stupid. Their reputation is worth more to them than their life. If it wasn't, we would never have any martyrs. Martyrs give up their lives and they leave their reputation, leave their mark on the world. I do not mean violence. But your government and your public officials must fear you, or you do not get anything done. Thank you guys very much. Now, I know we'll have plenty of time for a question and answer, and for anybody who wants to stay in touch and get some more advice, I ran out of flyers at the last place, so I have business cards left, and I'll hand those out happily to anybody who wants one. And we do have some question and answers, so anybody have any questions about what we talked about, please come up to the mic. They're forcing you to do that. Please come up to the mic and go ahead and ask.
How you doing? So this is Julio Alejandro. I have a question about people who have basically no constitutional rights, and most of the times I'm talking about undocumented immigrants, many or most of them from Latin America, from Mexico. That was the echo of the DHS. So how can you convince those people to go out on the streets to try to lose the fear in a massive population if they can be deported at any time, and they would have to suffer going back to the U.S. through the militarization of Mexico and the U.S. border?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So, as far as just for those of you who didn't hear the question, how do you get people who generally aren't considered to have institutional rights to get up to stand for their rights? I would say it depends on the issue. Because and I'll give you an example. With the NDAA, what I advise people on the Mexico-U.S. border to do when reaching out to these groups is say, look, you guys know what indefinite detention is like. You guys know what immigration detention is like. And now that we've and if we beat the NDAA, now we can show you what happens in a community once we do that. So, number one, it affects you because you know what it's like, except you're not detained indefinitely. You're detained for a short amount of time. And number two, not only does it affect you, but you can do something about it because we've done something about it in the past. And you won't get everyone, but those who are already willing to be politically involved and already at least a little bit concerned, you will not be able to convince everyone. I talked about this a little earlier. You will not be able to convince everyone, but when it comes to these immigrant groups, if it's whatever, and I don't know what your issue is, but whatever your issue is you decide to take on, when you talk to them, make sure they know it affects them personally. Make sure that they understand that you can win on an issue like this, and then find out who is willing to push past the fear and understand that there's no running away in the cards. The U.S. has an empire. There's no running away in the cards, that if we stand up now while we have the resources, we're better off, because if you want to stand up now, you will stand up later. But why not stand up now when you have the resources and tools to do so, instead of when the government becomes even more tyrannical towards you and your people, including the immigration community? So that's what I would say to answer your question. Yeah, thanks.
I'm wondering if you can expand upon something a little bit, because you mentioned coalition building from the right and the left, and also your issue is your organization is very narrowly focused. And an observation I was real excited about the Tea Party movement initially because something was happening. And then I knew people on the other side of the political spectrum, because I came from the sort of conservative right, and so my friends came from the conservative left, who were really excited about the Occupy statement. But both of those groups seem to largely lose purpose. Some cool things came out of them, but largely they got co-opted and other things happened. And I'm interested in what you have to say about the Restore the Fourth, because that group I was excited about because the focus was so narrow and there were coalitions. So I guess can you kind of expand on that?
Okay, so expand on Restore the Fourth particularly, or expand on
Restore the Fourth, as well as the importance of keeping a narrow scope and building coalition.
Great, yeah. Again, this is the first time I've ever given this presentation, so I did miss a couple things in there, so I apologize for that. But what he talked about as far as having a narrow scope, I highly recommend having a narrow scope. If you pick an issue, stick to that issue. Once you like with the NDA, for example, once we get some of the left and some of the right together, and we create that dialogue, then other issues come out, and eventually we can take on those issues. Eventually we can create that dialogue. Remember, the internet showed us very clearly that if you have a debate, you have an open debate, there's 100 people in the audience, you have an open debate between someone who's anti-liberty and someone who's pro-liberty, the pro-liberty side will always win in the end. Why? Because the guy who's anti-liberty wants his liberty, just not everyone else's. And the crowd's eventually going to see through that. That's why they didn't want Ron Paul in the debates. That's why they don't want any alternative presidential candidates in the debates. So creating this dialogue is important. However, as he pointed out, be my recommendation to stick to one issue. It is easier to create a dialogue and create a coalition around an issue rather than an entire spectrum such as libertarianism or anarchism or voluntarism or what have you. And then secondly, to your point on Restore the Fourth. Restore the Fourth is now run by a good friend of mine, so I don't think they're an issue, but they do serve as a lesson. Restore the Fourth was the organization, who knows of the NSA July 4th protests against the NSA? Anybody remember those? Okay, so they were last year, July 4th protests against the NSA. Restore the Fourth helped organize these. We reached out to Restore the Fourth back when they were just like 12 likes on Facebook. Nothing really, but a couple of young people. And we wanted to help. We wanted to help them move, because if they could grassroots fight the NSA and we grassroots fight the NDAA, that's one heck of a coalition. So we reached out to them, we started talking with them, and we helped them put on their event. Well, we didn't hear from them for several months, and they were not watching out for co-optation. They were young, they were naive like I was getting into this, they were inexperienced, and they were not watching out for They believed that DC was a possible way to go. They believed that they could network with just any organization. Well, if you're not careful, the people who have been co-opting for years. They know how to do it. And what they usually do is one of two ways. Number one, star power. I call this getting starstruck. Is they'll invite you on Hannity, or they'll invite you on Wolf Blitzer, or they'll have you at a star-studded performance with all your favorite politicians, all your favorite activists. They'll bring you into a place where you're so starstruck that they can just say whatever they want. I even see this happen with public speakers. Anybody ever spoken in front of a crowd before? Okay. Notice that after you speak, you have more authority, and the people listen to you more than before you speak. This is starstruck operating in a little bit of a smaller arena, but this is how you can get co-opted. They were liable to being starstruck. And not only were they liable to being starstruck, but another way is somebody hands you a bit of money. Now, they don't say there's any strings attached to that money. That would be dumb. They don't hand you the money and say, but you'll do this for me. They hand you the money and then leave it alone. And they hand you a little bit more money and leave it alone. They hand you a little bit more money and leave it alone. And 2 years down the road, they go to you and say, I'm a big one of your donors. Do you mind not covering that issue for me? And then your expenses are so reliant on them, you have no choice. Those are the two things they were vulnerable to. So we didn't talk to them for about 3 months. Then one of their people contacted me, Brandon, and he said that we'd like to work with you on the Stop Watching Us rally. Who knows of the Stop Watching Us rally in D.C.? Anybody remember that? Gary Johnson spoke at it, a couple others. Okay. So I had, as I'm a Star Wars fan, so as Obi-Wan Kenobi would say, I've got a bad feeling about this. That was a horrible British accent. Anyway, I got a bad feeling about this, and I did. I had a bad feeling about it. So I just avoided that, but I started working with Restore the Fourth, and we presented the idea that they should go on a local level to take on surveillance. And then we started hearing that the chair of Restore the Fourth, the new chair, they elected a new chair after all their protests were over. Apparently, he walked in, laid his credentials down on the table, and said, I've been in activism a long time, elect me as chair. And they did. So I start getting messages copied from Brandon that, hey, this guy keeps referring to DC experts that he's relying on for all his opinions. And the DC experts say it's bad to go local. And the DC experts say you probably shouldn't work with Panda. And the DC experts say, and the DC experts say. So I started looking into this guy's background. And the guy had worked for institutes funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and basically the global elite. And they had essentially allowed someone to come in, they got starstruck by the credentials, and then they got co-opted. And if we did a spreadsheet, like I said, on the Stop Watching Us rally, that traced all of their funding of all the people involved in net neutrality movement and the Stop Watching Us rally combined. And then we decided not to get involved. Brandon raised a counter campaign to Restore the Fourth's current leadership. He lost pretty badly because he was only 14. Which he's very articulate for 14, by the way. And he actually is launching a new project coming up shortly. They don't have all their materials ready yet, but they're launching Project Digital Privacy to combat surveillance on a local level. But what we found was because Restore the Fourth was not aware of who they were partnering with, because they did not do the research, because they did not look, and because they were starstruck, they were able to be co-opted. Those are the two main ways your organization, you, or your movement can be co-opted, and that's what I would say to answer your question. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was wondering a couple of things. If you could go into a little bit more detail on coalition building and how to go about it at a local level. For instance, how do I find out that there is a group, say, Moms Crocheting for Peace or something like that, which I would have no idea that they're out there. So how do I go about finding those people and building this coalition? And then how do I step it up? Say I've, like your friend, he's got the county in Idaho. Now how do I move that to the state level? And from there, how do I go to the federal level? Because eventually that's where it's kind of got to go with the NDAA.
Right, okay. I'd actually like the federal government to not take any action on the NDA. I don't think they deserve to have any credit for passing a law that allows them to indefinitely detain people without charge or trial. But that's a completely separate issue. So, coalition building. Here's our advice that we recommend to people for coalition building. Number one, that you There's a great website called meetup.com. I'm sure many of you are familiar with meetup.com. You basically, if you're writing notes, meetup.com. You put in your address or you put in your city, and then it tells you a bunch of groups in your area. What we recommend is, because there is such a very small amount of people who control the political decisions in a certain area, what we recommend is that you reach around your state. So anywhere in your geographical boundary of your state, on meetup.com, Google X Tea Party, your city Tea Party. Google your city Occupy movement. Google your city peace. Google your city. Start doing some research on the internet and reaching out to any group that, and I'm not sure what your issue is, so it depends on the issue, but reaching out to any group that you think is somewhat politically involved, aka can be affected by your issue. And meetup.com is great for that. Google's great for that. Yahoo Groups is great for that. There are several other places, but start with looking around online and then start connecting. Do not make the mistake of only connecting with people in your county or in your city. Connect with people all across your state, because they will have people in your county, or they will have people they know in your city. And then you'll be able to bring that loop back around and you'll be able to have enough people to go up to your city council. So that's what I would say as far as building a coalition. Number one is start by reaching out. When you reach out to these people, make sure they know it affects them. They have to care about it. Make sure they know it affects them when you reach out. When you start to get this coalition together, have either something they sign, like a coalition letter that they sign on to, or have an informal agreement with them, or have something that they agree to, whether verbally or physically. They will help at a certain point. And when you do that, you'll build a little bit more of a coalition. I would recommend start presenting to these groups. If you're not afraid of public speaking, if you are, don't be afraid of public speaking, or start working on it, because it's going to be necessary. But if you are okay with public speaking, start asking to present in front of these groups. Many Tea Parties and Occupy groups bring in guest speakers all the time. Go be a guest speaker to that group and bring some material with you. So that's what I'd recommend as far as starting to build your coalition. When you have about 1 to 3% represented, so if you have an ACLU group, you need 2,000 people. You have an ACLU group that represents 500. You have a Tea Party that represents 300. You have an Occupy group that represents 120. You have a Libertarian group that recommends 30 or 40. When you get that level, then you go down in force to your city council, your county commission, and then you'll have built connections across the state. So what should be happening is other people should be taking on your issue in their communities and in their areas, and then that additional pressure will multiply for your county or for your city. Now, as far as taking it up, I only disagree with one thing you said there. How do I? You don't. You don't take it up. You present the material, present the information to people around the state, and in their counties, they decide to take it up. Remember, you start in your county, your city, so that you're protected from such and such an action, because you care about your liberty. If you spend most of your time with people who don't give a rat's care about your liberty, then you will waste your time. But so I would say you don't. But if you find people around the state who are also interested in your issue, give them materials, touch base with them every couple weeks, keep them accountable, and then if they decide to move forward, spend your time with them. We 80-20 rule in business. You spend 80% of your time with the 20% of people who will, because the 20% of people who will do 80% of the work. And I'm running out of time. Let me quickly answer this question, and then I'm off. Yes.
New York is quite large, and we wanted to know what suggestions you had for getting. You need a lot. The 3% that you referred to was like over 100,000 people in our area. How do we get that many people to support the group?
What city are you in New York? New York City?
Yeah.
New York City. So in New York City, what you would do is it would just take a little bit longer. So what you would do is you would continue the process, just continue the process for longer. And what you'll try to do is set sub goals. So if you have something that big as New York City, set sub goals. So we're going to, like you have boroughs in there. So we're going to flood a borough meeting and get them to issue a statement against this. Set sub goals so that your people don't reach so high they can't. I mean, New York City Council is quite the target. Please go. But New York City Council is quite the target. So maybe your borough we'll win at our borough. We'll win in this one borough, and then we'll go to the next borough. And although it may not actually defeat or complete the issue, when you get to city council and you've got 7 boroughs issuing a legal opinion in your favor, now your people don't give up because the goal's too far away. So my recommendation for New York City is, if it gets bigger, if it's too big, section it off and take on a section at a time, and then have that be your victory. And when you get up to the final section, now you have all these sections coming together instead of you having to direct everybody, 100,000 people to the New York City Council. Each of these sections is directing a certain amount of people. Does that make sense? Okay, well, I am out of time. They're going to cut me off. Thank you all very much for coming. I have some business cards at the end if you'd like them.